Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Saturday, September 13th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 624 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. And today we are previewing week 2 of the New York Jets 2025 season, as the Jets will face off against the Buffalo Bills out at MetLife Stadium in an AFC East showdown. As we always do, we'll break down the New York Jets' roadmap to victory, what the Jets need to do to pick up the first win of the 2025 season, Aaron Glenn's first win as the New York Jets head coach. We'll take a look at the offense and defensive keys to the game, X factors on offense and defense, and of course matchups to watch both offensively and defensively, and we'll close things out with my prediction at the end. Before we dive into all of that, always open up with just some general thoughts, but even before we get into that, you got an 0-1 Jets team, a 1-0 Bills team, another 1 o'clock game, CBS, MetLife Stadium. Can't wait to get out there on Sunday. We'll be in attendance tomorrow afternoon, so looking forward to it. Hopefully the Jets can get even here going into a road game next week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Some of the odds in this one, the New York Jets here, 6.5-point underdogs, over under set at 47.5. That line could potentially still move here. Bills, according to ESPN Analytics, is given a 64.5% chance of winning, and the New York Jets are being given a 35.2% chance of winning. So clearly here, 2 weeks in a row. Last week, Jets were only 2.5-point dogs, but this week almost a touchdown home dog. So back-to-back weeks here, not much of a surprise, but the New York Jets open up these 2 home games as the road underdogs. And before we get into the injury report and ultimately what the New York Jets need to do in this one, coming off of a tough week 1 loss to get into the win column before going on the road for 2 straight weeks, just some general thoughts. You know, these 2 teams are coming off of 2 very different week 1s. This is a New York Jets team who goes out there against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a game that surprised many people, not necessarily the result, but how the game went. 66 total points scored, 34-32 finish. That was a game that had the lowest over-under of the week. Started the day raining all the way up until kickoff. 2 offenses that you didn't expect much from, specifically from a Jets perspective. You had a lot of questions about what Justin Fields would look like, how this team would look first game under Tanner Engstrand, all of these different things. You knew they wanted to run the football, but you didn't think that the New York Jets would go out there and play as well as they did, despite the loss. A lot of encouraging signs, but it was a loss where, yes, they scored 30-plus points, but it was a very difficult loss. It was a gut punch. It was a heartbreaking loss with the fumble by Xavier Gibson, who then gets released a couple days later. You had, the 2 missed 2-point conversions. If those don't happen, if the missed PAT from Nick Folk doesn't happen, little things here and there, the Chris Boswell 60-yard field goal, so many little things, couple penalties, couple mistakes killed the Jets in a gut-punching, heartbreaking type of loss. And then from the Bills' perspective, you have the complete opposite, which is a crazy comeback win. 41-40 over the Baltimore Ravens, an epic collapse by the Baltimore Ravens. And it was only week 1, but that had a chance to already be the game of the year in the NFL. And it was the first Sunday night game, the first weekend of the NFL. That's how crazy that game was. That's how crazy that comeback was. So you have two teams coming off of two very different performances. You have a Jets team coming off of a really difficult loss. Little things in that game hurt them. A game they should have won, a game they did pretty much everything better than the Steelers, except ultimately the little margins. So you have a very tough loss. How do they bounce back? And then from the Bills' perspective, prime time, crazy win. How do they come into this one? What kind of start do you see from the Buffalo Bills? Do you see a bit of a hangover? And how do the Jets respond? Because that's always a big question as well when you have a really difficult loss, a type of performance the Jets have, and to still lose the game. How do they respond as well? How does Aaron Glenn have this team ready to go? Last week, they were ready to go from the jump. They didn't kick in the first half. Or didn't punt, rather, in the first half for the first time since 1991. Do we see that type of start again? And this is a very important game for the Jets because with the loss to the Steelers, your realistic path to starting the season 2-2 and going into that Dallas game, that Week 5 game, still in it, was to beat Pittsburgh and probably beat Miami. Your path now gets a little bit more difficult to that, and you just don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're 0-2 going into Tampa on the road. It's just a tough spot. It's a big game here for the Jets. It's at home. You don't want to start either at home 0-2. So this is a big one for the Jets coming off of what was a really difficult loss. And from the Bills' perspective, they look to continue their fourth quarter heroics into this game tomorrow afternoon against the Jets. So the injury report in this one, couple key pieces will be out for the New York Jets, and the Bills also are missing a key piece. So definitely a pretty loaded injury report with some notable names on it. For the New York Jets, Kene Nwangwu will miss this one with a hamstring injury. He injured that, obviously, in the first game against the Steelers. He's out. Expect the new pickup in Isaiah Williams to get some run, to get some opportunity in this one after the New York Jets released Xavier Gipson with the back-breaking fumble last week. Josh Reynolds will also miss this one with a hamstring injury, so expect to see Allen Lazard. That's not a good thing. Nobody needs to see Allen Lazard, but that's who's going to be out there. He was a healthy scratch last week. Reynolds out. Expect Lazard to be the next piece up, and that just puts more pressure on this rushing offense to have a big day, and it puts more pressure on the ability for Justin Fields to get the ball to Garrett Wilson, get it to the tight ends, because Lazard, Tyler Johnson, those guys aren't anything that going to strike much fear. Josh Reynolds himself are not going to strike much fear into opposing defense. Jay Tufele, dealing with an illness, will miss this one as well. So expect Leonard Taylor to step into his place. So couple new names, couple injuries there. Isaiah Williams, Allen Lazard, Leonard Taylor, all guys that I think you should expect to see out there tomorrow afternoon. Michael Carter's questionable with a shoulder injury. Mason Taylor with an ankle, also questionable. That's the same ankle he's dealt with, that he was dealing with in training camp, that he's now dealt with here going into week number 2. So that's the Jets injury report. From the Bills' perspective, massive loss. Ed Oliver injured his ankle in practice, was in a walking boot, so he'll miss this one. That's a huge blow. We'll get into that here more in a second when we break down what the Jets need to do to come out on top. But missing one of their best defensive players here is a massive blow and a big chance for the Jets to exploit that area of the Bills' defense. For the Bills, some of the questionable pieces: Jordan Hancock dealing with a shoulder, Teron Johnson dealing with a quad, Shaq Thompson dealing with a hamstring and a hand injury, and Trey White is also questionable with a groin. So those are your injury updates, some opening thoughts. Now, what do the New York Jets need to do to pick up the first win of the Aaron Glenn era? 3 keys, as always, offensively and defensively. We'll start here on the offense. Similar theme to last week, but it's kind of tying 2 things into one here. That's starting fast on the ground. As I mentioned, these are 2 teams coming off of 2 very different weeks. A Jets team coming off of a really tough loss, and a Bills team coming off of a crazy, heroic, late comeback win, game-winning field goal, all that stuff. There's a chance here that this game is going to be decided based off of how these 2 teams start, right? If the Bills come out in this one on a little bit of a hangover and start slow, Jets can take a huge advantage of that and put themselves in a position to win this game early. And from the Bills' perspective, if the Jets come out a little bit slow, still kind of dragging after a really tough loss, or the Bills just in general come out quick, that puts the Jets in a really tough spot, especially a Jets team that the way this offense is built, you want to play with leads. So I think it's important, start fast, specifically on the ground, run the heck out of the football again early on, establish the run again early on. We saw that last week with this Jets team, establishing the run early on in the first half where they were going down, capitalizing, scoring touchdowns, not punting, as I mentioned in the open. And why I also think this is just so important is what the Bills did last week stopping the run. They couldn't stop the run last week. The Bills currently, after 1 week, are the 32nd ranked rushing offense in football. And when you take a look at what they gave up last week, it was 29 carries for 238 yards, 8.2 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns against the Baltimore Ravens. Derrick Henry himself, while he did have the costly fumble, outside of that, he had 18 carries for 169 yards, 9.4 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. Lamar added 70 yards and a touchdown. And from the Jets' perspective, they had a field day on a defense in Pittsburgh who a year ago was the 8th ranked rushing defense in the NFL. Jets went out there game number 1 under Tanner Engstrand and ran the heck out of the football. 39 carries, 182 yards, 4.7 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, 107 yards, 5.6 yards per carry from Breece Hall. Fields added 48 yards himself with 2 scores. Braylon had the other touchdown. Jets rushing offense after 1 week is 4th in the NFL. Bills 32nd in the NFL in stopping the run, was clearly the worst defense last week in stopping the run against a dynamic attack in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. And is Justin Fields and Breece Hall Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry? No, but they're similar in the scheme aspect of it where you're going to see a lot of those read options, right? Breece taking it, Fields taking it. Both of those guys being threats out of the backfield is huge. And if Breece Hall is able to repeat what he was able to do last week, that's huge for this New York Jets team. Establish the run. That opens up the pass. That's what we saw against Pittsburgh. You got to do that again tomorrow. And as I mentioned, Ed Oliver is out in this one. And the Bills were already vulnerable with Ed Oliver because Ed Oliver was out there last week and they still let up 238 rush yards. They let up 8.2 yards per carry. That is still crazy. I mean, that is just ugly, ugly, ugly from the Bills' defensive perspective. And with Ed Oliver, without Ed Oliver, it's a huge difference. When Oliver's on the field, they had a 38.9% rushing success rate allowed against Baltimore last week, which would have ranked 14th in 2024. However, when Ed Oliver was off the field last week, they allowed a 72.7% rushing success rate against Baltimore, which would have been worse than the worst team last year in stopping the run, which was the Carolina Panthers, who allowed a 22% success rate, or 72% success rate, rather. That was 32nd in the NFL. So last season, if you look at what the Bills did in week 1 and you compare that to last season, they would have been worse. 72.7% rushing success rate Baltimore had when Ed Oliver was off the field last week. And Ed Oliver was a monster last week. That's a 33.8% difference. Oliver had 6 tackles, a sack, a 92.1 overall Pro Football Focus grade, which was the only one better than Quinnen Williams. He had a 92.7 run defense grade, which was 2nd in the NFL. He had 5 run stops, 4 pressures, and a quarterback hit. He was a monster in week 1, and he's not going to be out there tomorrow. And I think early you've got to exploit that if you're the New York Jets. Daquan Jones, TJ Sanders, Deion Walker. Sanders and Deion Walker, both rookies, inexperienced, playing bigger roles tomorrow. Early and often, run the football, establish the run, do what Baltimore was able to do early in that game, do what you were able to do against Pittsburgh, and you have an advantage already here with Ed Oliver missing this game with the ankle injury. So that's my first key. Start fast, establish the run, show your identity once again here early in week number 2. My second key, kind of similar to also what I talked a little bit about last week, and we saw the Jets actually do this, but that's take chances against the Bills safeties. And I want to bring up the Bills safeties here because kind of interesting, both from a pass game perspective and a run defense perspective. They struggled mightily last week, and they have struggled. Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop, your 2 starting safeties for the Buffalo Bills. Last week, they were awful. Not only against the run, which I'll note because you can throw that into the conversation as well when you talk about getting to the second level of this defense. Bills safeties last week missed and came a combined 8 tackles. And when you look at Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop, who is a rookie the second year out of Utah, the second round pick in 2024. When you look at those 2 guys last week, your 2 starting safeties, Bishop had a 39 tackling grade and Taylor Rapp had a 58.4 tackling grade. And Bishop had a 41.5 run defense grade. Taylor Rapp had a 48.7 run defense grade. 8 missed tackles as a group. Bishop, Taylor Rapp, that entire safety room missed 8 tackles, really struggled against the run, but they also really struggled in coverage. Both of them logged both of them logged very ugly overall Pro Football Focus grades. When you look at how they graded out from an overall perspective and a coverage perspective, Taylor Rapp had a 29.1 overall grade. Cole Bishop had a 54.8 overall grade. Bishop had a 65.6 coverage grade, which actually wasn't bad. It was kind of average, but Taylor Rapp had just a 29.8 coverage grade. He really, really struggled. So 2 things. Not only do you look at the Jets getting to the second level from a rushing perspective against these safeties who missed a ton of tackles, you watch back some of the tape and you see some of the mistakes that they were making, a lot of bad angles. And tomorrow there's a chance Jets can really exploit that. They should be able to really exploit that. But I also look at it from a coverage standpoint. 2 guys that really struggled last week, Taylor Rapp specifically, Pro Football Focus coverage grade into the 20s, which is really, really ugly. And you look at this Jets team, you have last week, they took some chances, stretched the field a bit. The biggest play was to Garrett Wilson, that 33-yard touchdown, kind of Fields and Garrett flashing back to their Ohio State days. Fields last week, 16 of 22, 72.7% completion percentage, 218 yards, 9.9 yards per attempt, a touchdown, no interceptions, 119.1 passer rating, a 75.1 QBR. He had a 90.4 passing grade, which was a career best. He also had a 0.68 EPA per attempt, which was also a career best, and his 88.9% adjusted completion percentage was the 3rd highest in his career. Not only did Fields go out there last week and have a good week and have one of the better weeks among quarterbacks in the NFL, the New York Jets passing offense is inside the top 15. The New York Jets offense as a whole is 6th. They're comfortably inside the top 10. That's a beautiful sight. Fields himself, though, had one of his best weeks of his career. Best passing grade he's ever had, best EPA per attempt he's ever had. He tallied, the 2 rushing touchdowns as well. In total, he had 266 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is a secondary from Buffalo, from a safety perspective, that's got some holes. They're very vulnerable. The Jets stretched the field a bit. Obviously, running the football, establishing their run early on, that's huge, but taking some chances. Tanner Engstrand this week talked about explosive plays. They had 11 last week. Engstrand said if they can have 8 explosive plays a week, that's what you want. That's a good spot to be in. And those can happen on the ground, but you also look at explosive plays through the air. Garrett Wilson last week, 7 receptions, 95 yards, a touchdown on 9 targets. Garrett's actually had a lot of success against the Bills in his career. In 6 games against Buffalo, he's had 386 yards on 36 receptions and 3 touchdowns. That's an average of about 6 receptions, 64 yards per game, which is pretty solid for his 3 seasons here. So Garrett deep, target the safeties, target that vulnerability. Fields deep, take some chances, take some risks. hidden area of Buffalo's defense that's a weakness. That's my second offensive key to the game. And my final offensive key here is one of the only knocks that I think you probably had on the Jets offense last week, which was short yardage situations. It's executing short yardage situations, and you can kind of label this in a couple different ways. I put execute short yardage situations. You can also put, better play calling. And Tanner Engstrand this week actually even said it. He took accountability for it. He wishes he had some of those 2-point conversions back. He wishes he had some of the plays back. And I also agree. I think the Jets this week, it's very important for them execute in short yardage situations. You look at the small little margins that the Jets lost last week's game in. One of those areas was the short yardage stuff. You look at the 2-point conversions. Didn't like either of those play calls. The one to Garrett Wilson, throwing it in the corner of the end zone, triple coverage, you're not giving him a chance. I did not like that at all. But more specifically, I didn't like the shotgun run to Braylon Allen. And we saw that a couple times, not just on the 2-point conversion, but we saw that a couple other times throughout the rest of the game, including late in that game where they had a chance. The drive before the Steelers went and kicked the field goal, before the Jets' final drive, ultimately when the game ended, they had a second down. They ran it with Brees. It went nowhere. And they did a very similar play on third down. Little too conservative, didn't like the play call, and Fields ended up losing a couple yards. They also had a 3rd and 1 earlier in the game during the second quarter where they had to settle for a field goal. Fields on a 3rd and 1 lost 4. Didn't love the play call. Shotgun. And you saw a couple shotgun situations. The biggest one coming with the Braylon Allen play. That's the biggest one everybody remembers. And they executed at a 50% clip on third down. But there were a few plays that you want back, a few plays that just sneak it with Justin Fields. It's as simple as that. Go under center, give it to Brees, give it to Braylon. Don't do any of this fancy, overly complicated shotgun run. That stuff does not work. Let your offensive line dominate the trenches. Let your short yardage back and Braylon do his thing, or your quarterback who you can run a quarterback sneak with, which they did at one point. Do more of that, less of the shotgun. So that's my final offensive key there is short yardage situations. That was the only real nitpick you could have with Tanner Engstrand last week was the 2-point conversions and some of the other short yardage situations, not just third down, but second down as well. Those are things you've got to be able to tighten up against the Bills tomorrow afternoon at MetLife Stadium. So 3 offensive keys: start fast on the ground, take chances against the Bills safeties, and execute those short yardage situations. Moving on now to the defensive side of the football, it's containing Josh Allen. That's key number 1. But I want to break this down a little bit more specific. The Jets have actually had a lot of success against Josh Allen when it comes to him playing at MetLife Stadium. Career Josh Allen has actually thrown more interceptions at MetLife Stadium than he has touchdowns. And recently, with this group of players on defense, they have really done a good job against him. In fact, in Josh Allen's last 3 appearances to MetLife Stadium, the New York Jets are 2-1 against the Bills. That's one thing with the Jets. When they go to Buffalo, they haven't had much success at all. But when Josh Allen has come to MetLife on the road to play the Jets, while it hasn't all been wins for the Jets, the New York Jets have had success against Allen and have kept him in check from a passing perspective. In his last 3 appearances against the Jets on the road, he's 1-2, right? That 2022 win with Zach Wilson, followed by the 2023 the opening week, the Rodgers Achilles game, that win. Last year, they lost 23-20. They should have won that game. We all know what happened. The Greg Zuerlein, the penalties was just a disastrous, typical 2024 Jet game where they just found a way to lose, right? In those 3 games, though, Allen has completed 66% of his passes for 656 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So on average, over the last 3 games, he's averaging over 1 interception per game, almost 2 interceptions per game on the road against the Jets over his last 3 appearances. 66.7% completion percentage, 1 touchdown per game, and about 218 to 219 yards per game with the 2 losses. Just some other notes. In the 2 losses, 2022 and 2023, he had just 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions combined in those 2 games. The 3 touchdowns, 2 of those came last year. So you look at the 2 previous games, Jets completely shut him down, including what was arguably his worst game of his career was the home opener in 2023 where he threw the 3 interceptions, the Jordan Whitehead game, where he had the game of his life. He also had 11 interceptions in 13 career games against the Jets, and that's not just at home, that's in general, 11 career interceptions. So the Jets have actually done a good job containing Josh Allen. They've been one of the only teams, at least at home, that have contained him from a passing perspective. My biggest concern, especially with the way this New York Jets defense runs now, is containing his legs and containing his rushing ability. Because that has always been one of the biggest traits about Josh Allen is not only does he have a cannon of an arm and his ability to go out there and take over a game from a passing perspective, MVP last season, all that stuff, all the accolades, but his rushing ability, and he's had success against the Jets rushing. The Jets have always struggled against rushing quarterbacks, is what concerns me most. Specifically against the defense that's going to run a lot of man coverage. That puts you in spots where if Allen gets out of the pocket, and especially on some of these blitzes, he gets out of the pocket, he's going to have space. And if he has time, he's going to take off. He's going to run with it. And that's where you have your big worry. So really from a containing Josh Allen perspective here for the Jets, we all know what he can do as a passing perspective. That's all. We all know that. And the Jets have had some success there. They've got to continue that. But it's more so containing him with his legs. And for the amount of blitzing they're going to do, that's good from the perspective of they can get him rattled, force him into some poor throws, force him into turnovers, which he has had issues with throughout his career, has cleaned them up, but you get him rattled, you hit him, you force him into making kind of quick, not very smart decisions when you're blitzing him. That's all good, but if you're blitzing him and he's getting out of the pocket and he's buying time and he's using his legs, that's where you have an issue. And I think you're going to see the Jets potentially mix in a little bit of zone, not only to take some of the stress off the corners, but also to kind of have that eye for Allen, where in a man situation, his likelihood of picking up big chunk yards with his legs is a lot higher. So contain Josh Allen, contain his legs, keep him in the pocket, get pressure, keep him contained, slow him down in that area. And kind of to lead right into my next point here for the New York Jets, my next key here defensively, that's slowing down 2 receivers specifically, right? Everyone's going to talk about Keon Coleman, and rightfully so. Keon Coleman's their number 1 receiver, 8 receptions last week for 112 yards, a touchdown. He looks like he is in for a very big year too. But similar to what I said last week about Sauce Gardner against DK Metcalf, my bigger concern was the tight ends. And the tight ends had a high volume of catches, and I know Jonnu Smith had the touchdown, but the tight ends didn't kill the Jets by any means last week. What really is going to hurt this Jets team and hurt them in game number 1 is these other receivers. Because I trust Sauce Gardner against Keon Coleman, just like I trusted him last week against DK Metcalf. My bigger concern after week 1 is what the heck are we going to get out of? Not even that. I think we all know what we're going to get out of Brandon Stevens. I would bench him immediately. They're not going to do that because they paid him $36 million. But AZ Thomas can't be any worse. So my bigger concern and the bigger key to me tomorrow is containing and slowing down Khalil Shakir and Josh Palmer. And I throw Shakir in the mix because he's the slot guy. I look at Michael Carter tomorrow. Big game for him. He was awful in week 1. Dropped an interception. When you look at how he graded out, he was really, really poor. A 51.8 overall grade, a 50.7 coverage grade, and just a 42.7 tackling grade. In all areas, he struggled. one of the highest paid nickels. Not only do you got to bring in that football and that interception opportunity, but you've also got to shut down the opposing team slot. He wasn't able to do that. And Brandon Stephens was awful last week. And my biggest concern is Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, who is sort of their volume guy. My biggest concern is those guys having really, really big days. Sauce does his job against Keon Coleman, but it's Shakir and Josh Palmer who destroy the Jets, destroy Brandon Stephens, specifically Josh Palmer against Stephens. And that's how the Jets lose this game. That's how the Jets defense struggles for a second straight week. And Palmer and Khalil Shakir are coming off of a solid week number one. Palmer had 5 receptions on 6 for 61 yards. Shakir had 6 receptions for 64 yards. Combined, they had 11 receptions for 125 yards. And I think what's more important is Palmer last week had 40 of his 61 yards against man coverage. So that's 65.6% of his yards came against man coverage. Jets run a lot of man. Another thing to keep an eye on, do they mix in some zone to take some of the stress off of Stephens? If Palmer's is off to a good start, if Stephens is struggling, because he struggled in man a ton, that's just who Stephens is. That was 9th in the NFL with those 40 yards. Keon Coleman also had a ton of success against man with 52 of his 112, which were 4th. But again, I trust Sauce. The bigger concern to me is Stephens against these number 2s. And moving forward, teams, smart teams, offenses like the Bills, who are at the top of the league, are going to target Brandon Stephens. They're going to target, if Michael Carter continues to struggle, and I believe more in Michael Carter to bounce back, but he's got to show it, they're going to target those guys. And until they prove they could stop it, it's not, the targeting Brandon Stephens is not going to stop. So that's my biggest concern. Stephens last week was awful. I mean, the numbers tell themselves. He had allowed a 71.4% completion percentage, 7 targets, 5 catches allowed. The 60 yards, the 2 touchdowns, the terrible dropped interception, inexcusable, play that should have been made. We should be talking about the 1-0 Jets against the 1-0 Bills if Brandon Stephens makes that play. The 136.9 passer rating allowed. We talked about it all week. He was awful. He's got to be better tomorrow. And it starts with slowing down Josh Palmer and not letting the Bills just feast on him. He's got to be better. So that's my second defensive key. And finally here, it's forcing turnovers. And the reason I bring up the whole turnover argument is, number one, the Jets have done a good job forcing turnovers against Josh Allen in the past, and it's helped them win games. Specifically, you go back 2 years ago, the 3 interception game, year before that, 2 interceptions, ton of success. Sauce actually got him back in 2022. When the Jets have had their most success against Allen, it's been forcing him into mistakes. It's him playing reckless. And the reason I bring this up too is the Jets have not done a good job of forcing enough turnovers the last couple of years. And week number 1 was another one of those examples of they didn't fall on a fumble, which they never do. They got to do more of that. But they had the 2 dropped interceptions. The Brandon Stephens dropped interception and the Michael Carter dropped interception. 2 plays that completely changed the game if those are caught. And I look at tomorrow as a game the Jets have got to force some turnovers, whether it's an interception, whether it's a forced fumble, whatever it is. Maybe the football gods return the favor and the Buffalo Bills fumble the kickoff. Whatever it is, they've got to capitalize, force a turnover, and specifically put yourself in good field position. All right, force a turnover where the Bills are in their own territory. You get an interception and you're set up on the Bills 30, and you've got a golden opportunity to cash in and score. Something like that changes games. Something like that is the difference from winning a game and losing a game. And it's a Jets team that hasn't done enough. I mean, you look at the interceptions. They had 17 in 2023, which was top 10. That was tied for 8th. They still had a -6 turnover differential, though, which was tied for 24th. Last year was brutal. They couldn't get their hands on any footballs in the air. They had 7 interceptions last year. That was near the bottom of the NFL. They were tied for 29th. Also had a -2 turnover differential, which was middle of the pack. Lions, when you look at Glenn and Detroit, they've had 16 interceptions in each of the past 2 seasons. This is a Jets team that's got to get their hands on the football. Tomorrow is big with that. Underdog against Buffalo, a passing attack, a team that's going to throw the football. a team that if the New York Jets rush defense shows up is going to be forced to throw the football. Because last week, rushing-wise, the Bills struggled. They only averaged 3.5 yards per attempt. James Cook, who is still a very solid running back, it's only one game, but he struggled. Yes, he had a touchdown, but only 44 yards for 3.4 yards per carry. If the Jets are containing the run, which they did last week, and that's a positive, Buffalo is going to be forced to pass. They're going to pass a lot. It's going to be up to this secondary to not only contain and slow guys down, safeties, corners, everybody minus Sauce has to do their job because they didn't last week, but also force those turnovers, get those interceptions. That's big. And force fumbles as well. However you get it, they need those game-changing plays. You can't continue to happen where the Jets are the team turning the football over and costing them games that way. So that's my 3 defensive keys. Contain Josh Allen, slow down Khalil Shakir, Josh Palmer. Bigger concerns to me because I trust Sauce Gardner against Keon Coleman, and force turnovers. When you move on to the X factors here, starting offensively, a couple different directions you could go in, but I'm going to go back-to-back weeks here. I'm going to go Breece Hall. To me, he's huge tomorrow again. And as I mentioned right away, starting fast on the ground, Breece Hall repeating what he did last week would be huge for this team. You could throw Fields in the mix as well. Every single week, the quarterback's going to be an X factor, but Garrett, all those guys, the offensive line, again, Membu, Olu, 2 guys that you would love to see go out there and dominate. Again, Membu had a historic first performance as a rookie last week. Olu, we talked about it previously, but when Breece ran behind Olu, had 76 carries, or 76 of his 107 rush yards came behind him, which was 71% of his yards. He averaged 6.9 yards per carry running behind Olu last week. Membu was excellent against TJ Watt. Feel like you have your bookend tackles. So I look at tomorrow Breece Hall, not just from the standpoint of how good the offensive line was and everything else with the offense and how good he looked, but they're missing Ed Oliver. This is a chance for this Jets run game led by Breece Hall to just take over tomorrow's game. They're missing Ed Oliver, and they already struggled in week number 1. So you take their best defensive lineman out of the equation, and what this Jets offensive line was doing last week against a very good Steelers front 7. Tomorrow, you look for Breece to have a very big day. Again, look for potentially back-to-back 100-yard games. So Breece Hall is my X factor, and also from a receiving game standpoint as well. He had only 2 receptions last week for 38 yards. Breece is going to have those weeks where he has 50 to 60 to 70 yards receiving. Maybe tomorrow's that day. No Josh Reynolds, going to have to piece it together once again by committee behind Garrett Wilson. Defensive X factor, I'm going to go in a couple different directions here. I'm going to say Brandon Stevens is the big one. He's got to be better. He's got to be competent. I have no faith, but he's huge tomorrow. I'm also going to throw Jamien Sherwood out there. And the reason I throw this out there is when you talk about stopping Josh Allen, when you talk about containing him from a rushing perspective, Jamien Sherwood's going to have a lot to do with that. Jamien Sherwood's going to have a lot to do with containing these tight ends as well. Dalton Kincaid had a really good week 1. He's going to have to slow him down. If they're going to play zone, going to play man blitz, he's got to, of course, play a role there as well. And Sherwood struggled a bit last week, similar with Quincy. Sherwood went out there, had just a 40.7 coverage grade. He allowed a touchdown, 4 receptions, 4 targets, 39 yards. He's the leader of this defense. There was some miscommunications in the secondary. There was a play from Michael Carter who kind of just thought that the receiver somebody else had the zone. Or he would just kind of toss him over to another zone, and it was a miscommunication, and the Steelers scored on the play. Those type of things can happen tomorrow. Sherwood is the leader of this defense. He's kind of got to be on top of that. He's got to be, from the communication aspect, a big piece in that. And just when you talk about stopping a dual threat player in Allen, your linebackers are going to play a big role there. So I look at Jamien Sherwood as well as an X factor, someone that's got to go out there tomorrow afternoon and have a big game. Coverage standpoint too. Everybody in the second level, linebackers, safeties, corners, minus Sauce, need to do better. So those are the X factors. Defense and offensive matchup to watch offensively. Like I said, Breece Hall against this Bills run defense. Justin Fields and these wide receivers against this Bills safety room. Secondary as well, Christian Benford, Garrett Wilson. That'll be a fun matchup to watch. Benford really becoming one of the more underrated corners in the NFL in a lot of ways last year, was a top 10 corner. And you want to see what he could do for a repeat this season. So you're going to see a lot of that tomorrow. But you talk about stretching the field. You talk about taking chances. Justin Fields, this receiver room, tight ends, all that against this Bills safety group. Without Josh Reynolds, the Jets, they got to have a big day there. And then from the defensive perspective, I mentioned Brandon Stevens against Josh Palmer, Khalil Shakir, Michael Carter, those matchups minus Sauce, and the Jets defensive line against James Cook. Like I said earlier, James Cook had a rough week last week. Very good running back, had a poor week. Jets defense, Quinnen Williams, Harrison Phillips against his former team. That interior, they were big last week. Go out there again this week and be big again. If you can do that and eliminate the run game for Buffalo, a Buffalo team that is much more run first than they've been in the past under Joe Brady, who has really put into that running mindset. If you can take that away like you did against Pittsburgh, that's a huge piece in the Jets coming away with this one. So those are my keys, X factors, matchups to watch. In terms of my prediction for this one, I hope I'm wrong, but I do think the Bills win this game. 31-24 is the score here. I think it's a late touchdown. Unfortunately, I think it's another one of these good days for the offense. I don't think they're going to put up 30-plus points again, but I'm excited to watch this Jets offense. To me, though, I think it's going to be another one of these days where the secondary struggles and the AZ Thomas, the Malachi Moore starting to over Tony Adams, those type of talks are only going to heat up after this game. I just don't have enough faith in Brandon Stevens. I don't have enough faith in this safety room against a Bills offense that we all know what they can do through the air. So I think the Jets offense has a good day. I think Fields has a good day. I believe in that, but I think it's the defense ultimately late that bends and breaks. And I hope I'm wrong. I'll be in attendance for tomorrow. Looking forward to getting back out to MetLife Stadium. Hopefully come away with a victory, get to 1-1. This is a big game on many levels. You don't want to start at 0-2, no matter how you lose. If it's another close game and the Jets offense looks good and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. Glenn said it. He's not into moral victories. Fan base is into moral victories. I'm certainly not into moral victories. 0-2 is 0-2. So find a way to win. I hope I'm wrong. I hope the Jets come out on top in this one. And there's certainly a road there for that to happen. I just need to see more from the secondary. I don't trust them against Josh Allen. But we'll see. I hope I'm wrong. Go out there, win, get the first place. First place in the division, and go on to that 2-game road trip in Tampa and Miami at 1-1. Let's go. That'll do it. Appreciate you all so much for the support. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. What are your expectations for this game? What is your prediction? What are your big matchups? What do you feel the New York Jets need to do to win this one? And any other Jets takes you got, leave them down below. Appreciate you all as always. Until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.